Hey guys, welcome back to DajibanLife, and here I am today with part 2 of how to lower your Dodge van. So I went through a lot of different setups before finding the one that worked for me. I tried a lot of different parts. I tried springs out of a Dodge Durango, Dodge Dakota, Ram 1500 or 3500. I even tried like lowering springs that were made for like a Chevy truck. And after going through all those iterations, I kind of figured out, the setup that worked for me, which I sort of outlined in my last video. But I spent a lot of time and money finding what worked. And so I thought I would make this video to save you some trouble. So tip number 1 is going to be, do not remove your bump stops, ever. Do not remove those. Those are designed to work with your van suspension, and they're a key part of it. And getting rid of them, you're gonna have all kinds of problems. I was sent a video by one of my viewers where he had removed his bump stops and his frame was bent because his axle was knocking up into it. And yeah, I mean, that'll happen if you don't have bump stops. That's what they're for. So yeah, don't remove them. The thing is, when you lower your van, they're gonna be a little bit too long, the bump stops, so you're gonna wanna cut them down. I made the mistake of trimming them just flat when I first did it, but what you wanna do is cut them in like a triangle shape. So if your bump stop is kind of shaped like this, right? When you cut it down, you wanna cut it down kind of like this. So it's more like a triangle. And that's because when you cut them flat, right? Like when this hits your frame or whatever, it's gonna smack. And in the rear of my van, they're still flat because I didn't go and source a new pair of bump stops out of the junkyard and cut them down the way that I should have. But in the front, I did that because I cut my bump stops too short, and I had to go source another pair from the junkyard and recut them. So when I recut them, I cut them like this. And what that does is it like adds a little bit of damping force so that when the bump stops do hit the frame, it's not just a slap, right? It's more like a gradual, like it'll still be sort of a little bit rough, but like it'll be much more gradual. So definitely the trick is to cut them at a taper so that it lessens the shock when they actually do hit the frame. Also, another trick is that when you're cutting them, and I have, when I did it, I used a hacksaw. So when you're cutting them, if you just cut them like wood, it's gonna be really tough because the rubber will kind of fold in on itself. So what you want to do is with your hand, right, or your foot or something. I think I used my foot and I stepped on it, and then I used my other hand to sort of, open it up a little bit and cut. Then it'll just cut through like butter, and it makes it a lot faster. I spent like a couple hours on the first set that I did, and then once I figured out the right way to do it, it took me like 10 minutes. So yeah, save yourself some time and just spread the rubber out a little bit when you're cutting to make it easier. You want to make sure you have enough suspension travel that the axle and or the drive shaft, or both really, are not hitting the body, because when I first lowered my van, it was so low that the drive shaft was hitting my body, and you can see here it was spinning, and it wasn't like too severe, so I didn't bend my drive shaft, I didn't dent it or anything like that. That would have been really bad because it would have thrown the drive shaft out of balance, and it would have caused all kinds of problems like vibrations, maybe even failure. But all I got was a little bit of scoring, so it's not too bad, and it still works. But I'm definitely probably not going to be doing any kind of crazy burnouts anytime soon, because the drive shaft is definitely not like 100%, obviously. So in order to ensure that you have enough suspension travel, I would definitely recommend getting stiffer springs, 3500s in there. And yeah, it'll raise the ride height, but if you want to go lower, then you can definitely just add blocks under your flip kit, right? And that's the way I would probably go lower. Beefier struts will also help with the controlling suspension travel, and the stock struts should be good till about 4 inches in the back, because what ends up happening is the stock strut is kind of at this kind of angle and at the normal, the stock ride height. And when it's lowered down, what ends up happening, because the axle doesn't move in relation to the ground, right? So the axle stays in the same place, but when the body comes down, the strut will just sort of angle. So it'll just be, working in a more extreme angle. And you can lower the van down about 4 inches and not really affect the working of the strut. The thing is, shocks aren't really designed to work at this angle, right? They're more designed to work, straight up and down, or a slight angle. this is kind of, it's not being as efficient as it could be. So what I would say is, if I had to do it over again, or even in the future I'll probably do it, is going to be adding a shock extender and getting some like heavy duty shocks for the rear, because right now I do have Caravan shocks, Dodge Caravan shocks in the back, but you have to remember Dodge Caravan struts don't have as much damping force, because obviously a Caravan only weighs like, I don't know, maybe 4,000 pounds, 5,000 pounds at the most, but the van is empty, weighs 6,000. If you put on shocks that aren't really made for that sort of payload, then obviously you're going to perform more poorly, right? But I mean, you have to make some sacrifices if you want to be really low. Okay, so the next tip is going to be, staying in the rear here, is you want to weld your spring perches all the way around. What I noticed, and these pictures don't really show it that well, but what I noticed when I did mine was that in the back, the spring perches are only really welded along the top, and then right on the edges, right? And then in the middle, there's some gaps where the spring perch is not welded. So what you want to do is definitely you want to close all those gaps and weld all the way around on your stock spring perch. Because what happened to me was that driving around with these spring perch adapters on with the flip kit, it like knocked up, like there's gonna be some movement and like stuff is gonna happen, right? And my stock spring perches actually broke some of the welds, and the spring perch actually bent a little bit because of all the force that was happening. So to save you that headache, what you should do is weld your spring perches all the way around, your stock ones, and then weld your spring perch adapters for your flip kit onto that, so that you won't have any issues. Okay, so moving to the front, the stock struts can handle about a 2-inch drop without any sort of modification. They'll definitely work. They won't bottom out if you're only at about a 2-inch drop. Obviously that's spring wise. So if you're using a Dakota spindle, that doesn't apply to you, because the shock length doesn't change at all. So you could actually drop it another 2 inches from there and still be okay for like a total of 4 inches, in the front. But anything more than 2 inches, right, if you're lowering through a spring, then you'll have to space the shocks downward by the same amount. So the springs I use, the Moog 7390s, lowered my van about 2.5 inches in the front, right? So that was about a 1/2 inch more than stock shocks could take. So I used washers, right? And it's pretty ghetto, like I get it. And I should probably weld the washers together, but I haven't yet. But basically it spaces the shock down 1/2 inch. So I have that extra 1/2 inch of travel so that the shocks don't bottom out. And the stock shock mount screws or bolts, they're about 1.5 inches, I would say, or 2 inches maybe long. So you could probably get away with adding up to about 1 inch of washers and still be somewhat safe. But from just looking at things and how the lower control arm, the distance from the frame that it is, right, I would say that your max drop is going to be about maybe 4 inches. So if you look at the DAJIBAN pictures, their bump stops are cut down to nothing basically, so that their lower control arm and their frame are like right next to each other, maybe 1 inch apart. So they probably have like a 3 to 4 inch drop on there. I wouldn't recommend going that low, because that's just not enough travel. Like if you go on a racetrack, fine, whatever, but if you're driving on a freeway or a road or whatever, there's going to be bumps and stuff, and you're going to regret it. Like it's not going to feel good at all. And I know that from experience, because I pretty much rode my lower control arm on my frame, almost, like just about, right? I was about 1 inch away also, for about a couple months, and it was my spine really just paid the price for that. So I would not recommend going any lower than about 3 to 3.5 inches using the spring method. If you want to go lower than 3 to 3.5 inches in the front, then definitely go for the Dakota spindles and the brakes. You need the rotors and all that, right? And the spindles will give you a 2 inch drop, and then you can get another 2.5 inches using the Moog 7390s that I have. And I think that combination will work, because obviously control arms don't change, so the spring will fit in there. And you can get a max drop of about 4.5 inches that way. And if you cut maybe a half coil or a full coil off of that spring, then you can probably get about 5 inches, 5 to 6 inches on the front. So I would do it that way. But definitely I would leave at least maybe 2 inches of space between the lower control arm and the frame. And remember to cut the bump stop in like a triangle sort of shape, right? and so that will keep it from, you know, like smacking up metal on metal too much and breaking your spine like it happened to me. And it's okay for your frame to ride on the bump stop. Like if your bump stop's here and the frame is here and it's basically touching, that's all right. I've actually I looked at some forums, old muscle car forums, right? They would basically just sit their frame on their bump stop and, you know, just kind of build from that. And it's completely safe. It's fine. Like that's what the bump stops are there for. They're not really designed for the frame to be sitting on them full time, but you know, you don't really have another choice, right? Like especially our vans, because there's so little space. You just have to do that. I did see a guy who had C-notched his frame in the front so that the control arm could go up into it, because basically what happens is in the frame on our vans, there's a pocket for the spring, right? And basically there's a piece of metal like this, and it's reinforced from the bottom. And the control arm is down here, and it swings up and down like this. And so the spring sits up in here, in this area right here. And what happens is, like as the control arm comes up, it'll smack against this metal thing. So someone had just kind of notched this out so that this could have more travel like this. But that's going beyond like the limitations, you know, of the original design of the van. So me personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that, but apparently it does work. This guy has a YouTube channel. I've seen it, but me personally, I wouldn't, you know, feel comfortable with C-notching my front frame, because that reinforcement and metal and stuff is there for a reason from factory, because they designed it that way. If it were, you know, meant to go, if the control arm was meant to swing higher than it does, then they would have made it that way, right? And the last tip I have for you guys is to pick your wheel and tire combo and just build to that. I've gotten a lot of messages lately from people who, you know, have like a specific goal in mind. They're like, I want to drop my van 6 inches. They have specific numbers. And it's like, you know, how do you know that'll look good? Well, like once you get that drop, right, which is fine. First of all, you're probably gonna be rubbing, like all, you know, even on stock rims and tires, you're gonna be rubbing on everything. And so you're gonna have to kind of like, you know, figure out what the tire size you need and the wheel size you need, you know, like that's a lot of calculation. You know, when I lowered my van, I wanted to keep the original, you know, the OEM tire size, you know, as close as possible, or even a little bit bigger, just so I would kind of preserve my RPMs when I'm driving. And when I lowered my van, knowing that, right, that's why I could use my stock wheels and tires on there, using, you know, that as a reference. But if you're trying to go even lower, or, you know, have a smaller wheel and tire combo or whatever, then you're gonna have to, I would just say, pick the wheel, right, and the tire that you're gonna roll with, right? Stick them on the van. You're gonna be all high wired up for a while, right? But then lower it down till you get the look that you want, the stance that you want, so it looks good to you. I would make that the goal, and making the van look good, rather than trying to, you know, hit a certain number. Like I need to be at 5 inches in the front and 7 inches in the back, you know, whatever, bro. Like it doesn't really matter, because if it doesn't look good that way, then you're gonna want to raise it back up anyway. You know what I mean? And so why go through all that trouble? Just pick the wheel and tire, and then lower it down so that combination that you picked looks good. All right, well, that's pretty much everything that I can tell you about, you know, from my own experience about lowering Dodge vans. Hopefully this video and the previous video will give you enough info to sort of move forward on your build. And I really, you know, send them to me once you do them. If you do lower your van, send me pictures, you know what I mean? I'll have my email address linked in the description below, so you can email me those pictures. Maybe I'll do a video about that, of all the rides that people, all the DAJIBANs out there in the US. I think that'd be really cool. And I really want to see someone do the spindle and spring combo, a 2-inch drop with the spindle, and then another maybe 2-inch drop with the Moogs 7390s, for a total of 4.5 inches in the front. I think the van will be slammed. Like even at 2.5 inches, I'm pretty low, right? Another 2 inches, like I'd be scraping my spoiler, my lip, on the ground. So, you know, I definitely want to see someone do that. Maybe I'll do it in the future. But, you know, for now, I think I'm at a good place. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. But I really, you know, hope this helped. And really, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing your rides. All right, well, thanks for watching.